message arrived on the investigator's desk on the morning of October 28th, buried beneath a week's worth of invoices and unanswered emails. It was printed on thick cream paper, the kind seldom used in the modern world, with the faint scent of sea salt clinging to it, as though it had crossed an ocean to reach him. Mr. Daniel Mercer, you have been granted temporary access to Smalls Lighthouse, Pembrokeshire, for the purposes of investigation and documentation of its alleged supernatural occurrences. Departure, October 31st, 10 a.m. from St. David's Harbour. Contact, Captain Rhys Llewellyn, vessel Airless, signed, Office of Coastal Heritage Preservation. Daniel stared at the letter, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. He hadn't applied for any official permit. Smalls Lighthouse had been on his list for years, but access to the isolated granite tower was nearly impossible. Closed to the public, its only visitors being maintenance crews and researchers granted rare clearance. He leaned back in his chair, watching the letter curl slightly at the edges in the faint breeze from the cracked window. It was almost too convenient. His YouTube channel, Echoes Beyond, had plateaued in views since midsummer. A Halloween episode at one of Britain's most desolate and allegedly haunted lighthouses could resurrect his dwindling following. He poured himself a coffee, ignoring the bitter tang of stale grounds. The name, Smalls Lighthouse, echoed in his mind, its legend well known to anyone fascinated by isolation and madness. Two keepers, early 1800s, trapped for months by storms. One dies, the other forced to live beside the rotting corpse until rescue. When they finally reached him, the survivor's hair had turned white, and he never spoke again. Daniel had read that story countless times, but something about it always gnawed at him. The idea of a light burning above a body, a signal of safety powered by a man living in the shadow of death. He opened his laptop and searched the sender's address. The Office of Coastal Heritage Preservation was real enough. Still, there was no record of his supposed permit. Perhaps, he thought, it was a quiet invitation, a chance to prove himself, to earn future access through results. He packed that night. Cameras, motion sensors, 2 digital recorders, spare batteries, and a heavy flashlight. A single notebook went into the top of the bag, the same leather-bound journal he used for every investigation. He turned to a blank page and wrote at the top, Smalls Lighthouse, October 31st, 2025. Light endures, men do not. Outside, the wind began to howl around his small Cardiff flat, rattling the window panes like a distant knocking. He smiled faintly, unaware of how that sound, that ceaseless, patient tapping, would follow him all the way to the edge of the world. The harbour at St. David's was grey and empty when Daniel arrived. The morning tide dragged against the pilings with a sluggish rhythm, as though reluctant to let go of what it held. A cold drizzle slicked the worn planks of the dock, and mist hung over the water in low, restless folds. Captain Rhys Llewellyn was already waiting beside the small fishing vessel Airless, hands buried in the pockets of his heavy oilskin coat. He was a weathered man, his face carved with the same deep lines as the cliffs that guarded the Welsh coast. "You're the investigator, then," the captain said without greeting, his accent thick as the sea air. "Can't say I envy you. The Smalls isn't a place for stories. It's a place that keeps them." Daniel forced a polite smile and offered his hand. "Appreciate the passage, Captain. Won't take me long. Just one night." Llewellyn looked at the outstretched hand, but didn't take it. "One night's enough," he muttered. "Weather's turning." Daniel followed him aboard, his camera bag thumping against his shoulder. The boat rocked under his weight. He felt the first twinge of unease. Not fear, not yet, but the awareness of isolation settling into his bones. As the Airlies pushed away from the dock, the sound of the engine was swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the sea. The mist thickened, erasing the land behind them. Soon, all that remained was water and the distant shape of the lighthouse rising from it like a grey tooth from the jaw of the ocean. Smalls Lighthouse. Daniel had seen photographs, but none prepared him for the sheer strangeness of its existence. It stood on a small cluster of jagged rocks, far from any shore, surrounded by nothing but black water and wheeling gulls. The tower was stark white, but centuries of salt and wind had worn it to a ghostly pallor. "You know about the keepers," Llewellyn said suddenly, cutting through the sound of the motor. Daniel glanced up. "Of course. Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith, 1801. The captain nodded. "That's the one. You know what most folks don't say? When they hauled the surviving keeper off, he wasn't just quiet. He refused to step on land again, lived the rest of his days in a hut near the coast, still looking out to sea, as if waiting for someone to call him back." Daniel made a note in his mental ledger. Folklore variation, useful for narration. "You've been there before?" he asked. "Twice," Llewellyn said. "Once for maintenance, once for a rescue. Storm cut a tourist boat in half. We found the hull against the rocks, but not the men. Waves break strange around Smalls, like the sea wants to keep what it gets." He turned away, tightening the ropes as the lighthouse grew larger, more solid, the low roar of waves slamming against its base echoing through the fog. When they reached the small landing platform, Daniel felt the raw spray against his face. The tower loomed directly above, blotting out the weak sunlight. "Generator's been running since last maintenance," Llewellyn shouted over the wind. "You'll have light and heat, at least for a while. No signal out here, mind you. I'll be back tomorrow, weather permitting." "And if it isn't permitting," Daniel called. Llewellyn gave him a long, unreadable look. "Then I'd keep that lamp burning, lad. It's the only thing that listens." He helped Daniel secure his gear and then pushed off, the boat shrinking quickly into the mist. Daniel turned to face the lighthouse door. Thick, iron-banded oak with a small brass plate bearing the inscription 1828 Restoration. A heavy padlock hung open, as if someone had been expecting him. He hesitated. The sea crashed below, and gulls screamed overhead, circling the tower like restless spirits. Then he stepped inside. The air was cold and still. His footsteps echoed up the narrow spiral stair. Each landing was marked by a small circular window where the pale daylight filtered through, watery and distant. At the top, the lantern room glimmered faintly, the great lens gleaming like the eye of a sleeping god. He set down his equipment and powered on the recorder. October 31st, 3:10 p.m. Investigator Daniel Mercer documenting initial impressions. Conditions: fog dense, light wind. Entered Smalls Lighthouse at 14:55. Atmosphere: quiet, oppressive. Feels lived in somehow, as if the air hasn't forgotten its last breath. He stopped the recorder and exhaled, staring out across the endless grey horizon. The light flickered once, just for a heartbeat, then steadied again. Daniel frowned. There was no reason it should have done that. Far below, through the layers of metal and stone, came a faint rhythmic sound. Not the sea, not the wind. A hollow knocking, slow and deliberate, echoing up from the base of the tower. 3 knocks. A pause, then 3 more. He turned toward the stairwell, the recorder still in his hand, its red light blinking in the dimness. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came again, closer now, as though the tower itself had learned to breathe. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened into a wall. The horizon was gone, and with it, all sense of time. Daniel moved through the narrow rooms of the lighthouse methodically, filming as he went. The first floor held a small galley kitchen, rusted stove, 2 mismatched chairs, and a warped table that looked as if it hadn't hosted a meal in decades. A coffee cup rested upside down in the sink, fused to the porcelain by a crust of salt. He filmed the details, every flake of paint, every echoing footstep. His voice filled the emptiness. The structure is sound, typical 19th century restoration, likely automated since the 1980s. It's colder than I expected, not from drafts, but something else, like the walls themselves are leaching warmth. His breath misted faintly in the air, even though the generator downstairs still hummed. The second floor was a sleeping quarter, its narrow cot tucked against the curved wall. Someone had left a folded wool blanket at the foot of it. Dust coated everything except the small wooden desk beside the bed. On it sat a single object, a leather-bound logbook. Daniel brushed it clean with his sleeve and opened it. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting slanted and cramped, the script of a man who had written too long in solitude. The first entry was dated May 4th, 1891. Wind rose before dawn. Thomas says it will be another long week. The sea claws the rock like a beast hungry for us. I dreamt again of the light going out. Daniel flipped through more pages. Most were mundane, notes about oil rations, repairs, weather. But as the entries continued, they grew stranger. The knocking began again below the floor. Thomas swears it is the sea, but the pattern, it is too measured, too patient. 3 nights without sleep. The light falters whenever the knocking starts. We take turns tending it, but the rhythm comes for us both now. The last entry was scrawled across the page, the ink splattered, as if the pen had trembled in the writer's hand. He will not stop looking at me. I have barred the hatch. God forgive me if I must leave him to the dark. Daniel stared at the words for a long time, his pulse thudding in his throat. He'd heard the tale, one keeper dying, the other trapped beside him, but nowhere in the records did it say how long the survivor endured before rescue, or what truly happened inside the tower. The next page was blank, and the one after that. Then, near the end of the book, a single line written in a different hand. The light endures, men do not. The same words Daniel had written in his own journal before leaving Cardiff. He closed the log slowly. His camera lens caught the flicker of movement in the reflection of the window, a shape crossing behind him. He spun around. Nothing, only the spiral stair, winding down into shadow. He exhaled, shaky but composed. Fatigue, he muttered, mind playing tricks. The knocking started again. This time, he traced it down the stairs, recording as he went. The sound echoed through the metal walls, stronger with each turn. At the base of the stairwell, he reached the heavy maintenance hatch that led to the foundation level, a cramped chamber used in the old days for oil storage. The air there was colder, almost damp. He shone his flashlight through the hatch grate. The beam struck something pale in the dark, a shape that might have been stone or bone, or the trick of light on old driftwood. Then it moved, a single shift, subtle, deliberate. Daniel stumbled backward, catching himself against the wall. The flashlight beam shook violently across the metal. When he looked again, the space beneath the hatch was empty. He shut the grate, locked it, and went back up, each step heavier than the last. In the lantern room, the great lens rotated slowly, casting sweeping arcs of light into the fog. He set his camera facing the stairwell and turned on the night vision function. The green light filled the small chamber. Then, for the first time since arriving, he sat down. The air was silent except for the faint creak of metal and the rhythmic turning of the lens. He began a new recording. Entry 3, 1945 hours. Found logbook dated 1891. Possible authentic primary source. Mentions rhythmic knocking. Identical pattern to what I'm hearing now. No rational source located. My flashlight. Malfunctioned near the lower hatch. Atmospheric interference. He stopped. The lens continued to rotate. Outside, the fog pressed close against the glass like a living thing. From somewhere below, faint but distinct, came the sound again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks, he whispered to himself, voice barely audible. It's calling from below. The fog never lifted. By the time night settled in, it was impossible to tell where the sea ended and the sky began. The beam of Smalls Lighthouse swept endlessly across the void. A pale circle of light swallowed by grey, again and again, as if the ocean itself refused illumination. Daniel lit the small heater in the galley and opened a tin of soup. The simple ritual of eating grounded him, though the rhythmic hum of the generator beneath the floor never allowed true silence. Every sound here seemed amplified. The scrape of his spoon against the metal tin, the soft thud of his own heartbeat, the steady creak of the tower's shifting bones. He recorded a brief voice entry before sleeping. October 31st, 22:20 hours. Visibility 0. Environmental temperature dropping. Unexplained noises persist. Reviewed footage from earlier. Caught faint audio beneath stairwell. 3 distinct knocks followed by what could be low vocal interference. Possibly wave resonance. Will attempt EVP session before dawn. He closed the recorder and placed it beside his cot. The logbook lay open on the desk beside him. His eyes flicked to it as the lamplight flickered, the inked words seeming to shimmer like something alive. He will not stop looking at me. Daniel forced himself to look away. He was a man of logic after all, a documentarian of folklore, not a believer in it. Yet belief has a way of creeping in when one is alone with only the wind and the sea for company. At some point, exhaustion overtook him. He dreamt fitfully, visions swirling in the dark like the sea itself. He stood at the base of the tower, fog swirling around him, the beam of the lighthouse above sweeping through the mist. There was someone beside him, a man with white hair and hollow eyes, his hands raw and bloody. The man turned, and Daniel saw that his lips were moving, but no sound emerged. Then came the knocking. From every direction, from the stones, from the air, from beneath the surface of the dream itself. He woke, gasping, the taste of salt thick in his mouth. The lamp had gone out. The beam from the lantern room still pulsed faintly through the upper hatch, but it was weaker now, intermittent. The rhythmic whir-click of the rotation was offbeat, unsteady. Daniel checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. The generator should have been steady for another 6 hours at least. He grabbed his flashlight and made for the stairwell. The metal was cold beneath his hand. As he descended, the air grew damper, heavier, carrying a faint scent of rot, of brine too old for this world. The knocking started again. This time it wasn't distant. It was in the walls, following him. He stopped on the second landing, shining the beam toward the lower hatch. The grate was closed, still locked, but the metal vibrated gently, like a heartbeat under tension. He raised his camera, filming as he knelt beside it. Time is 2:53 a.m. Sound continues, apparently structural. Checking resonance. The words froze on his tongue. The grate shifted beneath his hand once, as though something had pressed against it from below. He jerked back, heart pounding. The flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning until its beam landed on the far wall. And there, faintly visible, were wet handprints smeared upward along the metal steps. 5 distinct prints, leading from the hatch toward him. Daniel scrambled back up the stairs, slipping on the damp metal. The sound followed, not knocking now, but the scrape of movement. Slow, dragging, deliberate. He reached the lantern room and slammed the door shut, throwing the lock. The beam outside faltered again, dimming, flickering, and for an instant, in the curved reflection of the glass lens, he saw something standing on the landing below. It was pale and impossibly thin, its form blurred by fog and shadow. It stood motionless, head tilted slightly upward, as though listening. Then the light flared, blinding white, and the reflection vanished. Daniel backed away, chest heaving. He fumbled for his recorder. Entry 4, 3:05 a.m. Visual contact, uncertain. Possible optical distortion from fog reflection. But I'm not alone in this tower. He turned toward the window. Outside, nothing but the endless, swallowing dark. He sank into the corner of the lantern room and waited for morning. But morning never seemed to come. At some point, he realized the beam had stopped rotating altogether. The light had gone still, as if it were staring directly out to sea. And down below, faint but certain, came the sound again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Only this time, it wasn't echoing upward. It was coming from just outside the lantern door. Dawn broke unseen. The fog had thickened overnight into a moving wall of silver. The horizon gone, the ocean invisible beneath its shifting mass. Daniel had dozed in the corner of the lantern room, one arm wrapped around his camera, the recorder still running beside him. When he woke, his throat was raw, and his ears rang with a hollow pressure, the kind that precedes a storm. He checked the recorder. 10 hours of static and low, oceanic murmurs, but buried deep within the noise was something else. Faint tapping, then a whisper. He turned up the volume. Light endures. The voice was breathy, stretched thin by distance and distortion. It might have been the wind. It might have been his own. Daniel shut it off. Outside, the first tremors of thunder rolled across the sea. The fog began to tear apart in ragged sheets, revealing the monstrous heave of black water below. Waves slammed against the rocks, sending white spray high enough to shatter against the glass of the lantern room. The tower groaned under the assault, metal and stone shuddering with each impact. The great light flickered again, once, twice, before holding steady but weak, like a candle trapped inside a storm. Daniel descended to check the generator. The sound of the wind filled the stairwell like a living thing, whistling through the seams, clawing at the metal. When he reached the bottom level, the air was damp and cold enough to sting. The generator sputtered, coughing smoke. A thin trickle of seawater leaked through the corner seam of the floor, spreading slowly across the stone. He knelt to inspect the controls. Fuel's fine, he muttered into the recorder. Interference likely electrical. External humidity. The knocking interrupted him. This time it came from directly beneath the floor, muffled but powerful. Thud, 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 as if a fist the size of the ocean itself was pounding at the tower's foundation. Daniel rose slowly, the hair on his arms prickling. If that's wave impact, he whispered, then it's syncing perfectly with my heartbeat. He turned toward the hatch. The padlock was still in place, but the metal beneath it bulged slightly, the screws in the hinges straining outward. He aimed his flashlight down through the grate and froze. Something was looking back. 2 pale orbs, dim and distant, reflecting the beam like eyes from the dark water below. For one impossible instant, they seemed almost human. Then the tower lurched, pitching him sideways into the wall. The flashlight clattered away, skittering into shadow. The storm had arrived in full. He scrambled upward, gripping the railing, the entire structure shuddering under each monstrous wave. The wind screamed against the tower's outer walls, high and shrill, almost indistinguishable from a human voice. By the time he reached the upper chamber, the sea had become an unbroken plain of violence. Rain hammered the glass, and the great lens above him groaned on its bearings. Lightning burst across the horizon, forking white fire through the fog. And in that flash, Daniel saw a figure standing on the outer platform. For one heartbeat, it was clear. A man in tattered oilskins, drenched and pale, staring through the window with hollow eyes. Then the light vanished, and with it, the figure. Daniel stumbled to the door. It was still bolted shut. No footprints marked the wet metal of the walkway beyond. He backed away, shaking. His rational mind screamed for order, for an explanation, reflection, fatigue, hallucination. But the sound of the storm drowned all reason. He switched on the camera, his voice trembling. October 31st, 1722 hours. Visual manifestation confirmed. Male figure, external platform, vanished after lightning flash. Possible atmospheric distortion. Storm conditions worsening. Generator failing. Power fluctuation affecting lens rotation. Requesting evacuation at dawn if possible. He trailed off. The radio was dead. Static hissed endlessly from the receiver. The storm raged for hours. He sat in the lantern room, filming the chaos through the trembling glass, each lightning strike illuminating the endless sea. Between flashes, the darkness felt alive, as if something vast moved beneath the waves. Then, silence. The wind died in an instant, unnatural and absolute. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Daniel rose slowly, listening. His own pulse echoed in his ears. A soft scraping sound came from the stairwell below, like wet cloth dragging across metal. Then a voice, faint but unmistakable, called up from the dark. "Thomas!" Daniel froze. The voice was weary, broken, and close. Too close. "Thomas, you're awake!" He gripped the railing, heart hammering. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Only the hollow reply of his own voice bouncing down the stairwell. He aimed the flashlight downward, and for the briefest instant, he saw a hand, pale, waterlogged, reaching up from the shadows below. Then the beam flickered out. Morning arrived like a dull bruise. No sunrise, only a faint silver glow filtering through the fog, thick as milk and twice as cold. The sea had calmed, but the tower creaked with every slow shift of the waves, as though the storm had left its breath trapped inside. Daniel hadn't slept. He sat slumped beside the window, staring through the streaked glass at a horizon he could no longer find. His flashlight and camera lay beside him, both dead, the batteries drained though they'd been new when he'd arrived. The generator still sputtered somewhere below, coughing in weak intervals. He didn't want to go back down there. Instead, he opened his notebook and began to write. His handwriting shook. The knocking ceased around dawn. The voice, if it was a voice, addressed someone named Thomas. That's one of the keepers from 1801. I'm trying to reason this through, but my mind feels fogged. I've lost all sense of time. No sign of the boat, no signal. The sea looks endless. He stopped. The air in the room had shifted. The glass of the great lens caught the light differently now, refracting the pale grey morning into long, thin ribbons across the walls. For a moment, Daniel saw his own reflection staring back from 100 broken angles. His face multiplied, warped. Then, as he moved, one of the reflections did not. It lingered half a heartbeat longer than it should have, its mouth slightly open, its eyes wide with something between terror and recognition. Daniel froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the glass. His reflection blinked out of rhythm with him. "Christ," he whispered. He reached for the lens. The air near it was cold, colder than the rest of the room, almost painful. His fingertips brushed the glass surface, and something pulsed beneath it, as though the lens itself had a heartbeat. In that pulse, he saw movement inside the reflection, not his face, but the outline of two men standing behind him. He spun around. Nothing. The stairwell yawned open, silent. He looked back at the lens. The figures were gone. Only his own pale reflection remained, framed by the empty lantern room. Daniel backed away until he hit the far wall. His breath came in shallow gasps. He reached for his recorder again, but his hands shook too badly to hold it steady. Entry 6. Visual distortions confirmed. Mirror phenomenon. Possible residual image. I can't tell what's real in this place anymore. The light, it feels like it's watching. He stopped the recording. Silence pressed down on him. The kind of silence that has weight, like water above a diver. From somewhere deep within the tower came a sound, not the familiar knocking this time, but the faint scrape of metal against stone. Slow, measured, like someone dragging an object across the floor. Daniel forced himself to move. He descended 2 flights, every step accompanied by the low groan of the structure. The air grew colder as he neared the sleeping quarters. The door there stood ajar, swaying gently with each tremor of the tower. Inside, the logbook still rested on the desk. But it was open now, its pages fluttering, though there was no wind. A new line had been written across the last page in dark ink, still glistening wet. He hears me now. Daniel stared. He hadn't brought a pen down here since yesterday. He touched the ink. It smeared under his fingertip, fresh. His stomach lurched. He backed away, stumbling into the stairwell. The fog light outside flashed through the narrow window in rhythmic intervals, but slower than before, each rotation dragging like a weary breath. Then, from the darkness below, came another whisper. "Thomas!" He froze. "Don't leave me here again." Daniel's throat tightened. The voice wasn't an echo. It was coming up the stairs, closer with each word. He turned and ran, heart hammering, boots clanging on the metal rungs. The voice followed, pleading now, desperate. "The light's gone out, Thomas. Why did you lock the door?" He reached the lantern room and slammed the hatch shut. His whole body trembled. He pressed his forehead against the glass of the lens. Outside, the fog thickened again, wrapping the world in white. But just as the light swept across the water, he saw, for the briefest second, a figure floating in the surf below, arms outstretched, face pale and bloated, eyes staring straight up at him. Then the beam turned, and the image was gone. He sank to the floor, the cold from the glass seeping into his skin. The reflection in the lens stared back, lips moving silently, as though trying to tell him something he could no longer bear to hear. By afternoon, the fog had thickened into a wall. The world beyond the glass was gone. The sea, the sky, the horizon, all swallowed in a featureless grey. Even sound seemed to die within it. Daniel could no longer tell if the faint murmurs he heard were the waves below or the voices that had begun to speak from the walls themselves. The generator had failed sometime during the morning. The tower now pulsed with only the slow heartbeat of the emergency lamp, an anemic orange bulb that flickered every few seconds like a dying pulse. He had tried to fix the power. He'd descended all the way to the engine room, his flashlight beam cutting through dust and shadow. The metal walls dripped with condensation, the air heavy with the tang of rust. Something had changed down there. The puddle on the floor had deepened, dark and still as oil. When Daniel shone his light over it, he saw, faintly, beneath the rippling surface, the suggestion of faces. Dozens of them. Eyes open, mouths parted as though mid-scream. He stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. It flickered once and went out completely. When he reached down to retrieve it, his fingers brushed against something cold and soft. Something that moved. He bolted up the stairs without looking back, his breath tearing through the silence. Every step echoed like a gunshot in a tomb. By the time he reached the living quarters again, His hands were shaking too violently to steady the lantern. He tried the radio once more, static, thin and hissing like distant breathing. "If anyone can hear this," he whispered into the microphone, "this is Daniel Cross. I'm still at Smalls Lighthouse. I've lost power. The structure is compromised, possibly hallucinations, or residual haunting phenomena. Please respond, only static." Then a faint voice beneath it. "Turn it back on." He froze. The transmission wasn't coming from land. It was inside the frequency, like something bleeding through from a place not meant to speak. "Who is this?" "You have to turn the light back on." He stared at the dark lantern above him. The great lens sat still, lifeless, the last embers of day smothered by fog. "The light guides them," the voice said. "Without it, they drift." The radio went dead. Daniel stood there for a long time, heart pounding in the dim, flickering glow of the lantern. His mind felt split, half wanting to flee, half compelled to obey. He made his decision at dusk. With the cold biting at his fingers, he climbed the narrow stairwell again, carrying a canister of spare fuel. The walls seemed to breathe as he passed. The old stones exhaled a faint, briny mist that left his skin clammy. When he reached the lantern room, he paused. Something about the glass looked different. The reflection within no longer showed him alone. Behind his image now stood another man, dressed in a 19th century keeper's coat, hair slicked with seawater, face pale as wax. Daniel didn't move. The man's reflection lifted a hand and pointed toward the lamp housing. For a moment, Daniel felt as though someone else's will had slipped into his body. He knelt before the lamp, pouring fuel into its cracked base. The smell filled the room. He struck a match. Flame bloomed. The lens caught it, magnified it, and the room came alive with red light that pulsed like a wound. Outside, through the fog, a shape moved across the water. A slow, drifting form, barely visible, but unmistakably human. Then another, and another. Dozens. Bodies, pale and water-swollen, floating just beyond the rocks. Their faces turned toward the tower as the beam swept over them. Daniel's stomach lurched. He stumbled back from the lens. But when the light turned again, the figures had vanished. Only fog remained. He fell to his knees, shaking. His breath came in ragged bursts. Then, from behind him, a soft voice. "You brought it back." He turned. The figure from the reflection stood in the doorway now, solid, dripping, eyes empty as the sea. Daniel couldn't speak. The apparition stepped forward, leaving wet footprints across the floor. Its face was calm, almost grateful. "Now they'll find the shore," it whispered, "and I can rest." The air shuddered. The light flared once, bright enough to blind. When Daniel blinked his vision clear, the figure was gone. The floor was dry again. The lamp burned steady. For the first time since arriving, the tower felt still. But the stillness carried something beneath it, an unseen vibration, like the hum of distant machinery, or the sound of waves beneath a coffin lid. He knew then that something had been set in motion, and he wasn't sure it could be undone. Night fell with a certainty Daniel had begun to fear. The storm had passed, but the fog remained thick and unyielding, pressing the world into a suffocating grey. The beam from the lantern room swept mechanically, illuminating only mist and shadow. Daniel had not slept. He had not eaten. He barely moved. He sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the flickering lens, waiting for something he could not name. At first, it was subtle, the smell of salt and decay, faint, almost imperceptible. Then came the sounds, a soft scraping along the stairs, slow and deliberate. He grabbed his camera, heart hammering, and filmed the empty stairwell. Nothing. The scrape repeated, closer this time, accompanied by a low moan, a voice without form. Thomas. The whisper curled through the metal walls like smoke. Daniel's breath caught. Not again. Not now. But the voice persisted, rising and falling in rhythm with the lighthouse's creaking bones. He followed it downward, every step careful, the floor groaning beneath him. At the landing near the hatch, the whisper became a chorus, overlapping voices, male, female, young, old, all of them calling, crying, pleading. And then he saw it. A figure stood at the base of the stairwell, pale, soaked as if risen from the sea. Its coat was tattered, its hair plastered to its face. The eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to stretch into infinity. Daniel froze. The recorder in his hand beeped faintly, capturing the image. I don't... The figure moved closer, gliding rather than walking, the air chilled to a biting cold. His breath formed frost. The light. You've lit it. But it cannot stay lit forever, it whispered. We linger here, because it is not ours to leave. Daniel's fingers shook on the camera. Who are you? The apparition's form shivered, almost vibrating with an unearthly rhythm. Thomas, and the other, the one who could not leave. We are bound to the light, bound to the stone, until another takes the watch. Daniel's stomach turned. He realized with dawning horror that the logbook, the whispers, the knocking, all of it was a warning. Not just history, but prophecy. The keepers never truly left. Do not follow too far, it rasped, or you will become the lantern, and the sea will claim you too. The figure raised its hand, pointing toward the lens above. Daniel glanced up. The beam rotated, sweeping methodically over the mist, now faintly illuminating dozens of shapes just beyond the rocks. Pale, human-shaped, floating, waiting. They wait for the light to guide them home. But home is a place that no longer exists, the apparition whispered. A low, continuous knocking began beneath the floor again. Not 3 knocks this time, but a slow, insistent pulse, vibrating the metal beneath Daniel's knees. He realized then that the knocking had never been outside. It had always come from within, from the tower itself, from the walls, from the stone and metal, echoing the heartbeat of those trapped souls. The figure faded slightly, becoming more translucent. Its eyes lingered on him. The light endures, men do not. The words hit him like a physical blow. Daniel fell backward onto the cot, chest heaving. He understood now. The lighthouse demanded a watcher, one who would stand and wait, alone, for the dead to pass. And if he left, there would be no light, no guide, no mercy. He climbed back to the lantern room, trembling. The great lens rotated slowly, casting arcs across the endless grey. The beam caught the mist, and for the briefest instant, the outline of the drowned men appeared. Their pale faces turned upward, mouths open in silent screams. Then, as if aware of his gaze, they sank beneath the fog again. Daniel sank to the floor, watching the beam. The whispering ceased, replaced by a vast, oppressive silence. The kind of silence that presses into your skull and settles your thoughts into despair. He did not sleep that night. He did not close his eyes, and somewhere deep beneath him, the knocking continued. By the second night, Daniel had stopped keeping track of time. The fog pressed endlessly against the lighthouse, and even the faintest pulse of sunlight no longer reached him. The tower felt alive now, not merely a building, but a conscious, breathing entity. The knocking had returned, slower now, deliberate, echoing from below the floorboards. It had a rhythm he recognized. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. And always, just beyond comprehension, a faint whisper. Thomas, do not leave. Daniel's hands shook as he recorded the sound, his camera capturing every vibration through the stairwell and into the lantern room. Every time he tried to descend, the metal stairwell seemed to elongate, the steps stretching impossibly into darkness. His flashlight flickered, then died, leaving him in near total blackness. He tried to rationalize it, the fatigue, the storm, the fog. He was alone. This tower had history. He knew the stories. But logic faltered when the sound of footsteps, not his own, echoed alongside him. He descended anyway, moving slowly, breathing shallow, trying to maintain his footing on the cold metal. At the base of the tower, the hatch leading to the foundation level awaited. He shined the camera's night vision down through the grate. The space below was empty. At first, then pale fingers pressed against the metal from beneath, wet, sea-slick, trembling. They tapped the floor slowly. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. A low moan arose from below, building into multiple voices, overlapping, crying, pleading. They spoke in fragmented sentences. The light. Keep it. Do not leave. Thomas, you promised. Daniel's mind reeled. He realized then that the tower had absorbed them, all the keepers, all those claimed by the sea. And now he was part of their rhythm, their obsession with the light. His breath clouded in the cold air as he stepped back toward the stairs. But the stairwell was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there. The metal seemed to stretch endlessly into blackness, vanishing into the fog. He ran blindly, hands scraping against the walls. The knocking followed him, now directly behind, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. By the time he reached the lantern room, his mind was unraveling. The lens rotated slowly, as if mocking him, sweeping over a sea now filled with countless pale shapes, floating just beyond the rocks. Their eyes followed him. Their mouths moved, silent screams, begging, cursing, warning. Daniel sank to the floor, clutching the railing. The storm had passed. There was no wind. There was no wave. Only the fog, the light, and the sound of the dead moving beneath the floorboards. He thought of retreat, of leaving the lighthouse, but the voice came again, soft, insistent, impossible to ignore. The light endures. Men do not. A shiver ran through him. He understood now. The lighthouse demanded a watcher. It had claimed the past keepers. It would claim him if he failed. And the worst part, the thought he could not escape, was that leaving was no longer an option. Not really. Daniel's fingers trembled on the camera. He filmed the empty lantern room, the sweeping light, the fog pressing against the glass. He whispered into the recorder. Entry 9. I cannot leave. The tower. It will not allow it. I see them in the water, hear them below, calling. I think I am becoming one with them. The light endures, yes, but I do not. Above, the lens rotated once more. Below, the knocking continued. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Daniel understood finally that he was already too late, too far inside the rhythm of the lighthouse. And as the fog shifted outside, a new figure appeared on the balcony beyond the glass. Another soul, pale and dripping, staring directly at him. He knew with certainty that he was not alone, and he would never be alone again. Night had fully claimed the tower. The fog, thick and eternal, pressed against the glass, muting the world beyond to a whisper of grey. Daniel sat on the floor of the lantern room, shivering, clutching the camera like a talisman. The lens rotated slowly, sweeping its pale arcs over the unseen sea. He could see them again. The floating figures, faces turned upward, mouths open in silent screams, waiting for the light to guide them home. And beneath the floorboards, the knocking continued. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, endless, rhythmic, insistent. Daniel's reflection stared back from the glass, distorted and multiplied. But this time, another face lingered behind his own, pale, dripping, hollow-eyed, staring with impossible patience. It was the keeper from the past, the one who had never left. "You've brought it back," the voice whispered again, "but it cannot save you. It only claims more." Daniel tried to speak. Words failed him. He reached for the recorder, pressing it to his lips. "If anyone finds this, the lighthouse, it waits." The recorder slipped from his hands as a cold, wet hand pressed against his shoulder. He looked up. The figure was closer now, solid and yet ethereal, dripping seawater, eyes dark as the abyss. He stumbled backward. His boots slipped on the wet floor. The lens flared with a blinding white light. When he blinked, the figure had vanished. Outside, the fog swirled, concealing the water, concealing everything. The lighthouse stood alone, unmoved by time or storm. And in that silence, Daniel realized the truth. The tower demanded a watcher. It did not care who. It did not care when. It simply endured. He climbed to the lantern room's edge, looking over the railing at the rocks and surf below. Hundreds of pale faces floated in the grey, eyes wide, mouths silent, all waiting for the light to guide them. He shuddered. He understood now. To leave would be to let them drift, lost to the sea forever. To remain was inevitable. Daniel stepped forward, placing his hand on the base of the great lens. The metal was cold, pulsing faintly, alive. He poured the last of his fuel into the mechanism. The lens rotated. The light swept the fog once more, reaching across the endless grey. And in that beam, he saw it. The reflection of himself multiplied endlessly, stretching backward into the past, forward into an unknowable future. He understood then. The lighthouse had claimed him. He sank to the floor, knees against the metal, eyes fixed on the sweeping light. The knocking beneath him continued, now indistinguishable from his own heartbeat. Above, the lens rotated. The light endured. Below, the sea waited, and Daniel Mercer, investigator, observer, chronicler, would never leave. The fog pressed closer. The wind whispered faintly against the tower, carrying voices, laughter, and the sound of men long drowned. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, and the Smalls Lighthouse stood eternal, its light a silent testament. The light endures, men do not.